There are moments in history when the world seems to stop breathing. June 25, 2009 was one of them. Inside a rented mansion on North Carrollwood Drive, behind closed curtains and the echo of rehearsals that had pushed his body to the limit, Michael Jackson lay fighting the one battle he could no longer outdance. The king of pop, the man who once moved like he existed outside the laws of nature, now struggled simply to sleep. For weeks, exhaustion had carved itself into his bones. His heart raced at night. His mind refused to shut down. Every rehearsal for This Is It demanded more energy than his 50-year-old body could give. Yet he kept pushing. He kept smiling. He kept telling his team, "I must do this. The world is waiting." But when the world waits for a miracle, it rarely sees the price demanded behind the scenes. On that final night, Michael did what he had done quietly for too long. He tried to rest with the help of a powerful anesthetic meant for operating rooms administered by a doctor he trusted completely. He believed it would bring him a few hours of peace. He believed it would prepare him for the comeback that would rewrite history. Instead, it pushed him to the edge of silence. In the early morning, when his doctor realized something was terribly wrong, panic filled the house. A body that once mastered gravity now lay still. A voice that once shaped generations no longer rose above a whisper. And by the time the ambulance carried him away, the fate of a legend had already been sealed. When the news broke, millions refused to believe it. People poured into the streets. Strangers cried together. Radios stopped their programming. Television anchors choked on their words. The world had lost more than a performer. It had lost a piece of its cultural heartbeat. Yet behind the public shock lived a deeper, darker question. How did the most gifted entertainer of our time, a man who sold over 300 million records, who broke barriers, who united continents, who changed music forever, end up dying alone in a room where he only wanted to sleep? What happened to the child star, whose smile lit up stadiums? What crushed the gentle soul who once said, "I just want to bring happiness to people"? What broke the man who spent his life trying to escape the pain he never deserved? To understand his final day, we must journey backward. Back to the childhood that was never a childhood. Back to the spotlight that burned instead of warming. Back to the accusations that shattered him. Back to the battles with his own body. Back to the loneliness that followed him everywhere he went. The truth is not a single tragedy. It is many, and every one of them left a scar that brought him closer to this final night. Before we go deeper into the story of his rise, his wounds, and the shadows that hunted him to the end, I must ask you something. Long before the world called him the king of pop, long before the moonwalk or the glittering gloves, Michael Jackson was just a small boy standing in a cramped living room in Gary, Indiana, trying desperately to sing the notes his father demanded. While other children played in the sun or chased each other through school hallways, Michael was learning to survive a different kind of world. His father, Joe Jackson, believed discipline was the only path out of poverty, and discipline to him often meant fear. It meant belts. It meant shouting. It meant children frozen in silence as they waited for anger to pass. For Michael, it meant something worse. It meant becoming an adult long before he ever had the chance to be a child. Night after night, the rehearsals were relentless. 5 brothers, 1 dream, and a father driving them like a drill sergeant. Michael, the youngest of the group, was the brightest light, the quickest learner, the softest heart. That combination made him the perfect star, but also the perfect target for pressure he was far too young to carry. When his voice cracked, he was told to sing harder. When he stumbled, he was told to dance again. When his eyes filled with tears, he was told to stop acting weak. Michael grew up believing that love had conditions, and that affection could disappear the moment he failed to perform. He once admitted that when his father walked into the room, he felt physically sick from fear. Imagine being 5 years old and learning that the most dangerous place in your life might be your own living room. But fear can shape brilliance in strange ways. On stage, Michael transformed. The moment the lights touched him, something unlocked. His body, small and fragile in private, became unstoppable in public. His voice, trembling at home, became a weapon of pure magic. The world watched the Jackson 5 climb the charts, and they fell in love with the little boy who moved like no one else. But no one saw what happened once the curtain closed. Michael would sit alone after shows, exhausted, staring into mirrors that reflected both triumph and loneliness. Fans adored him, but he longed for something simple. Time to play. Time to be a kid. Time to breathe without being watched, judged, or trained. That time never came. The world celebrated his talent, but the cost of that talent was a childhood carved away piece by piece. Every applause became a reminder that he had no choice but to keep being perfect. Every trophy was proof that he belonged to the public long before he ever belonged to himself. The pain of those early years did not fade with success. It followed him. It shaped him. It left an empty space inside him that he would spend his entire life trying to fill. And one day, in his desperation to reclaim the childhood stolen from him, he built a place unlike anything the world had ever seen, a place called Neverland. Before we go there, and before we explore how fame lifted Michael high enough to touch the sky, yet left him even more alone. Fame did not arrive slowly for Michael Jackson. It consumed him like a wildfire. By the time he stepped into adulthood, the world had already memorized his smile, his voice, and his every dance move. But it was the early 1980s that transformed him from a beloved star into something almost supernatural. Thriller, the album that shattered every barrier, crossed every border, and rewrote the definition of success. It was not just a record, it was a cultural earthquake. 7 top 10 hits, unimaginable sales, stadiums screaming his name, children copying his moves, adults mesmerized by his artistry. For a moment, Michael Jackson did not simply dominate music. He became the center of the global imagination. But greatness has a dark twin. And while the world celebrated a god, a man was quietly falling apart. Behind the scenes, Michael was fighting a battle no one understood. A battle against his own skin. It began subtly. Small, pale patches, random, fragile spots along his hands. At first he hid them, covered them with gloves, used makeup. But the spots spread. Doctors told him the truth. He had vitiligo, a disorder that destroyed the pigment in his skin. It would only grow worse. In the privacy of medical rooms, Michael was terrified. In public, the world was cruel. Tabloids began to ask if he was bleaching his skin. Critics mocked him. Late-night hosts turned his condition into jokes. The truth that he was suffering from a medical disease was drowned out by laughter and suspicion. Michael once said, "My skin is a problem people cannot stop talking about, but it is my pain they never see." At the same time, he was still recovering from the horrifying Pepsi accident in 1984, when a stage explosion set his hair on fire and left him with severe burns to his scalp. What people did not know was how much agony he lived with after that. Headaches, surgeries, chronic pain, and pain when ignored becomes a prison. Soon, medication became the only thing that allowed him to function. While the world admired his perfection, Michael was stitching himself together backstage with makeup, wigs, and medication just to withstand the demands placed on him. He hid the discomfort behind choreography. He hid the heartbreak behind the moonwalk. He hid everything behind the mask of a man the world wanted him to be. But every mask cracks. Michael needed love, but trust betrayed him. He needed privacy, but fame devoured it. He needed comfort, but the spotlight burned brighter every year. And so he did the only thing he could. He built a sanctuary far from judgment, far from pain, far from the world that wanted pieces of him, but never offered peace in return. He built Neverland, a place filled with laughter, rides, and innocence. A place where he tried to reclaim the childhood stolen from him. But Neverland, beautiful as it was, would soon become the center of a storm that nearly destroyed him. Before we open the door to that storm, Neverland was supposed to be his refuge. A world built from the pieces of a childhood he never had. A place where laughter replaced fear and innocence lived, where pain once settled. But in 1993, that sanctuary became something else. It became the opening act of the darkest chapter in Michael Jackson's life. The accusation came without warning. A young boy, a family friend, someone Michael had cared for with the genuine softness he reserved only for children, claimed he had been harmed. Overnight, headlines exploded. Television anchors repeated his name with a tone that suggested guilt before evidence. Tabloids feasted on the story like vultures circling a fallen king. Michael did not just face a legal accusation. He faced a global judgment. What followed was a humiliation few public figures had ever endured. Police raided Neverland. Helicopters hovered over the ranch like predators. Reporters stood outside the gates day and night. Every rumor became a headline. Every headline became a weapon. And then came the moment that broke him. Authorities demanded a full-body search, a strip search, to compare the boy's description with Michael's body. A body scarred by vitiligo, a body he spent years hiding from cameras because the disease had left it patchy and fragile. He later described those hours as one of the most painful experiences of his life. Not because of the physical intrusion, but because of what it meant that the world no longer saw him as human. Yet through all of this, Michael insisted he was innocent. Again and again, calm, clear, heartbroken, he said, "I could never harm a child. I would rather cut off my own arm." But innocence is not a defense in the court of public opinion. Months passed. Attorneys battled. Evidence was questioned. Motives were analyzed. The case never went to criminal trial. Instead, it ended with a civil settlement that Michael agreed to only because he was exhausted, drained, and under relentless pressure to end the media circus. But the world misunderstood the settlement. People assumed guilt where there had never been a verdict, and that misunderstanding became a shadow that followed him for the rest of his life. This scandal did not just hurt him, it crushed him. For the first time, Michael's smile faded in public. His music slowed. The boy inside him, the one who built Neverland to heal old wounds, now watched the world twist that dream into something sinister. Even worse, the pressure pushed him deeper into medication. Painkillers, sedatives, anything to help him sleep, anything to quiet the storm inside. The truth was simple. He survived the accusation, but he never truly recovered from it. And what awaited him in the next decade would be even harsher, stronger, more public, more devastating, because another accusation was coming. And this time, it would become a full-scale trial, watched by the entire world. Before we step into that storm, a decade after the first accusation, just when Michael began to rebuild the pieces of his life, fate struck again. But this time, it did not come quietly. It came with cameras, with handcuffs, with headlines written in permanent ink. In 2003, a journalist named Martin Bashir released a documentary that followed Michael through Neverland and into his most private spaces. What was filmed with trust was later edited with suspicion, and one scene changed everything. Michael sitting beside a sick child. Michael holding his hand. Michael saying that sharing his bed with children in need was an act of love, not harm. Those words, spoken with childlike sincerity, detonated like an explosion. Within days, prosecutors announced new charges. Within weeks, police raided Neverland again. And for the second time in his life, the man who spent decades singing about healing the world now stood accused of harming the youngest members of it. But unlike 1993, this case did not dissolve. It escalated. In early 2004, Michael Jackson was arrested. Cameras flashed as he walked into court, wearing a white suit, his face solemn but dignified. Millions watched the footage on repeat. Some saw a criminal, some saw a victim, but almost no one saw the fragile man fighting to stay upright behind the mask of control. The trial that followed in 2005 was a spectacle unlike anything the entertainment world had ever seen. Reporters camped outside the courthouse for months. Fans held signs and prayed. Critics sharpened their words. Every day, Michael walked past a wall of microphones into a courtroom, where the stakes were nothing less than his entire existence. Inside, the accusations were dissected. Witnesses were challenged. Contradictions surfaced. Narratives fell apart under scrutiny, and piece by piece, the prosecution's case began to crumble. What the public saw was drama. What Michael lived was torment. He lost weight rapidly. His hands shook. He nearly collapsed in court more than once. Doctors warned he was too sick to continue. But stopping meant surrender. And surrender was something Michael had never learned to do. After 4 months of testimony arguments and global speculation, the jury delivered a verdict that stunned the world. Not guilty. On every single charge, on every single count, Michael did not celebrate. He did not smile. He simply closed his eyes and let out a breath that sounded like it belonged to a man who had been drowning for years. He walked out of the courthouse cleared by the law, but not by the world, not by the tabloids, not by the late-night jokes, not by the public memory that too often confuses accusations with truth. The cost of this trial was unimaginable. Emotionally, physically, financially, spiritually. Neverland would never be the same. Michael would never be the same. And as the world moved on to the next headline, one fact remained painfully clear. He had survived the trial, but it had broken something in him that would never fully mend. What came next was a man in exile, a king without a kingdom, moving slowly toward a comeback he desperately needed, and one his body was no longer prepared to handle. Before we move into that chapter, after the verdict in 2005, Michael Jackson did not return home as a victorious man. He returned as a ghost of himself. The trial had drained him to the core. Years of stress carved deep hollows beneath his eyes. The constant scrutiny shattered his spirit, and the place that once represented Joy Neverland now felt poisoned by memories of raids, fear, and betrayal. He abandoned it, left the ranch behind like a grave he could not bear to visit. For the first time in his life, Michael Jackson became a man without a home. He drifted quietly from Bahrain to Ireland, searching for space to breathe. He avoided cameras, he avoided crowds, he avoided anything that reminded him of the world that once crowned him, then nearly destroyed him. But even far from the spotlight, one thing continued to torment him: his body. The injuries from his 1984 burn accident never truly healed. Nerve pain pulsed through his scalp and neck. Multiple surgeries left him vulnerable to chronic discomfort. And after years of rehearsals, intense performances, and emotional trauma, his body began to fail him. Sleep became his enemy. Night after night, he lay awake while exhaustion pulled at him like a weight. Doctors tried medication after medication. Some worked briefly, others made him worse. By the late 2000s, Michael's reliance on prescription drugs had quietly wrapped around his life like chains. Not for pleasure, not for escape, but simply to function, to stand, to move. to silence the memories, to silence the pain. Money once abundant slipped away. Lawsuits, settlements, lavish spending, abandoned projects, years of no touring. The man who generated billions for the music industry now found himself drowning in debt. His only way out was the very thing that had built him and broken him: a comeback. In 2009, when the announcement came that Michael Jackson would perform a massive 50-show residency in London called "This Is It," the world erupted with excitement. Fans lined up for tickets. Billions of eyes turned toward him once more. But behind the scenes, Michael was terrified. He had not toured in over a decade. His body was fragile. His stamina was fading. Even small rehearsals left him breathless and trembling. Yet, he kept going, because he believed he owed the world one final gift, because he wanted to prove he still had magic left, because he needed to stand on a stage again and feel alive. Every night after rehearsals, he returned home exhausted, ice packs on his joints, medication to help him rest, hope in his voice, fear in his eyes. The dream of "This Is It" was beautiful, but the truth behind it was cruel. Michael needed the stage to save him, but the stage was slowly killing him, and the closer opening night came, the more his body whispered a warning his heart refused to hear. Before we step into the final nights of his life, the closer Michael Jackson moved toward opening night, the more his life felt like a quiet countdown. Every rehearsal for "This Is It" showed the world a glimpse of the legend he once was. But when the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, his body revealed the truth. He was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. The kind of tired that comes from decades of pressure, trauma, injury, and heartbreak. Each day he arrived at the rehearsal space with a gentle smile, nodding at dancers who grew emotional simply being near him. When the music started, something miraculous happened. His body, no matter how fragile, remembered the rhythm. His feet still knew how to glide. His voice, though softer, still carried the soul of a man who had lived every lyric he sang. Kenny Ortega, the director, watched him with both awe and concern. At moments, Michael shined brighter than anyone in the room. At others, his hands trembled, his balance faltered, his breathing grew uneven. There were nights he could not sleep at all. Nights when anxiety wrapped around him so tightly that he begged for rest, even just a few hours. And each sleepless night pushed him further into the grasp of the one man he trusted to help him, Dr. Conrad Murray. Propofol, a drug meant only for hospitals, slowly became Michael's desperate solution. Not for pleasure, not for escape, but for survival, for sleep, for strength, for the chance to give his fans the show he believed they deserved. He whispered to those close to him, "I must do this. They are counting on me." It was as if he believed the world needed saving again, and only he could save it. June 24, 2009 was one of his best nights. Michael danced with energy that surprised everyone. He laughed. He joked. He sang with a clarity that felt like the return of something sacred. No one knew this would be his last rehearsal. No one knew the light they saw that night was the final flare of a star reaching the end of its fuel. In the early hours of June 25th, behind the closed doors of his bedroom, Michael Jackson lay struggling against the weight of another sleepless dawn. He asked for rest. He asked for peace. And in trying to give him that peace, his doctor crossed a line that would change history forever. The drug that was meant to help him sleep slowed his breathing, then slowed it more, until it stopped. When paramedics arrived, they found the most famous entertainer in the world lying unresponsive. The beat that once moved nations silent inside his chest. They tried again and again to bring him back, but the king of pop, the man who seemed immortal on stage, was gone. The world cracked open. News anchors trembled. Fans screamed in disbelief. Billions mourned a man they felt they knew, even if they never truly did. But even in death, Michael Jackson's story was not finished, because what he left behind, the legacy, the controversy, the magic, and the wounds would echo louder than ever. Before we enter the final chapter of that legacy, when a life as bright as Michael Jackson's ends, the silence that follows is never simple. It is heavy, it is conflicted, it is heartbreaking, and it is filled with questions the world may never fully answer. In the days after his death, people gathered outside hospitals, outside studios, outside Neverland, holding candles, photographs, and the memories of a man who shaped their childhoods, their dreams, and the soundtrack of their lives. Cities around the world lit up in his honor. Radio stations played his music non-stop. Strangers cried together in streets and train stations. It was as if the planet itself paused to inhale one final breath with him. Yet standing in that global grief was a paradox. Michael Jackson left behind not only unmatched artistry, but also a legacy tangled in misunderstanding, accusation, and pain. The world that adored him also judged him, mocked him, doubted him, and at times broke him. And now, in the quiet after his passing, people began to look again. Closer, clearer, kinder. Doctors confirmed his vitiligo. Experts highlighted inconsistencies in old accusations. Several of those who once testified against him publicly changed their stories. And his family, his friends, and many who had known him intimately spoke up at last, no longer afraid that the noise of tabloids would drown them out. What emerged was a portrait the world had been too distracted to see. A fragile man with a gentle soul, carrying scars far deeper than the glitter of fame ever revealed. But even more powerful than the darkness was the light he left behind. Thriller remains the best-selling album in history. His dance vocabulary reshaped global pop culture. His music videos became short films, raising the standard for an entire industry. His humanitarian work, often overshadowed, helped causes on every continent. He broke racial barriers, uniting fans, Black, white, Asian, Latino, Middle Eastern, and beyond, proving that rhythm has no borders and music has no color. Most importantly, he inspired millions to dream bigger than the places they were born. He showed that pain can be turned into art, that vulnerability can become strength, that even a child from a tiny house in Gary, Indiana, can change the world. In the last quiet years of his life, Michael once said something almost whispered, yet unmistakably honest. "All I ever wanted was to give love. That is all." And in the end, love is what he received back. In stadiums, in memorials, in voices singing his songs across generations, in the way his music still lifts people from loneliness, heartbreak, fear, or the weight of a difficult day. Michael Jackson did not die a perfect man. He died a human being shaped by extraordinary gifts and equally extraordinary wounds. But the measure of his life is not found in scandal or speculation. It is found in the millions of hearts he touched, the boundaries he broke, and the art that continues to live long after he is gone. The man is gone. The legend remains. And the echo he left behind will continue to rise, to shimmer, and to heal long after the world stops dancing.